I didn't expect the worst moment of my life to arrive, wrapped in fairy lights and champagne flutes. The venue was a renovated lakeside lodge, all polished wood and soft jazz humming through hidden speakers. My sister, Nora, had chosen it because it looked expensive without trying too hard, which, honestly, summed her up perfectly. She loved things that looked effortless. People too. I stood near the edge of the room, fingers tight around a glass I hadn't touched, watching her work the crowd. Nora floated from guest to guest, laughter ringing just a second longer than natural, every gesture calibrated for admiration. Her fiancé, Marcus, followed a step behind, calm, observant, the kind of man who didn't need to dominate a room to control it. And then there was me. Elena, my aunt said earlier, smiling in that thin, practiced way. You're still at the university office, right? I nodded. Same answer I'd given for years. Yeah, still there. That was the version of me my family liked. Safe. Small. Administrative. What they didn't see were the nights I left my apartment after midnight. The hearings that ran long. The weight of decisions that followed me home, pressing into my chest long after I kicked off my shoes. They didn't see it because they never really looked. Growing up, Nora had always been the headline. Debate team captain. Student council president. The one teachers praised in front of the class. I was the footnote reliable, quiet, helpful. The one adults described as sweet when they couldn't think of anything else. At some point, I learned that correcting people made things uncomfortable. So I stopped. The engagement party followed the same script. I arrived early, helped arrange place cards, refreshed drinks no one had finished. My mother didn't ask, she handed me tasks the way you hand someone their assigned role. Can you take care of this? Of course I could. When Nora finally noticed me, it was mid-toast. This is my sister, she said, looping an arm through mine, her grip light but possessive. Elena. She works in admin at the university. A few polite nods. Someone smiled sympathetically. Very organized, Nora added with a laugh. Keeps things running behind the scenes. The words slid under my skin, familiar and sharp. I felt that old tightening in my ribs, the reflex to disappear, to let it pass. Most people laughed. Marcus didn't. His eyes lingered on my face, brow creasing slightly, like he'd just seen a detail that didn't match the picture he'd been given. He tilted his head, studying me with quiet intensity. Later, as dinner plates clinked and conversations overlapped, he turned toward me fully. So? He asked, voice steady, curious. What do you actually do at the university? The table went still, and for the first time in years, there was nowhere left to hide. For a heartbeat, no one reacted. It was as if the words needed time to register, to move through the air and rearrange the version of me they'd carried for years. I could almost see it happening, faces tightening, brows furrowing, confusion rippling outward like a dropped stone in water. My mother was the first to speak. Professor? She echoed softly, like she was testing the word to see if it fit. It didn't. Not in the space she'd made for me. My father let out a short breath through his nose. Since when? Nora laughed. Too loud. Too fast. Oh, come on, she said, turning toward Marcus. She's exaggerating. Eleanor's always been academic. Her smile stretched thin. You know how she is. I watched her carefully. The way her fingers tightened around her wine glass. The way her eyes flicked to my parents, searching for backup. This was new territory for her. She wasn't used to losing control of the narrative. Marcus didn't laugh. He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table, eyes locked on mine. Criminal law, he repeated. You wrote the dissent on the Hartwell appeal. I nodded once. The sound my mother made was barely audible. Something between a gasp and a whisper. Elena, is that true? Yes, that was all I said. I didn't elaborate. I didn't defend myself. The truth didn't need padding. My father slowly set his fork down, the metal clicking against the plate. You never told us. I met his gaze evenly. You never asked. The words weren't sharp. They weren't cruel. They were simply accurate, and that seemed to hurt more than anger ever could. Nora pushed her chair back an inch, the legs scraping softly against the floor. This is ridiculous, she said, color rising in her cheeks. So you just let everyone believe you were some kind of secretary? I work at a university, I replied. That part was never a lie. Marcus exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw as he studied me. I knew I recognized your name, he said quietly. Your work gets cited. A lot. That landed harder than anything else. Around the table, reactions fractured. My aunt stared down at her lap. My uncle cleared his throat and reached for his drink. Someone murmured, I had no idea. Nora stood abruptly. This was supposed to be my night, she snapped, voice trembling now. You couldn't have picked a worse time. I stayed seated, calm, grounded. You introduced me, I said. He asked a question. I answered, for the first time in my life. She didn't have a response ready. And in the quiet that followed, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not victory, not revenge. Relief. Like a door I'd been holding shut for years had finally been opened. And I didn't have to push anymore. Nora didn't come back for a long time. The balcony doors slid shut behind her, muting the lake's evening breeze and leaving the room thick with unsaid things. Someone finally cleared their throat. Another guest stood, murmuring about checking on the dessert table. Slowly, painfully, the party tried to breathe again. My mother reached for my hand. Her fingers trembled. Why didn't you tell us, Elena? She asked again. Softer this time, like maybe a gentler tone would unlock a different answer. I didn't pull away. Because every time I tried to talk, I said, you were already listening to someone else. Her grip tightened. My father looked up then, really looked at me, as if searching his memory for moments he'd missed. There were a lot of them. Across the table, my cousin Matteo gave me a small nod. Not approval, recognition, like he finally understood something he'd sensed for years but never named. Marcus stood. I'm going to check on her, he said. But his voice lacked certainty. Before he turned away, he glanced at me again. Thank you, he added quietly. For what? for not making this louder than it needed to be. I watched him go, the doors whispering closed behind him. The room felt different without, Nora's energy pulling everything toward her. Quieter, truer. Conversation restarted in fragments. But now people asked me questions. Real ones. How long have you been teaching? What made you choose criminal law? I read that ruling. Was that really yours? I answered simply, honestly. No embellishment. No shrinking. And with each response, I felt the ground steady beneath my feet. My father cleared his throat. I always knew you were smart, he said awkwardly. I smiled faintly. I know, that was the thing. I didn't need him to say more. When Nora finally returned, her eyes were red, makeup slightly smudged. Marcus followed a step behind, his expression unreadable. They took their seats, but the space between them felt wider than before. She didn't look at me. Dinner wound down soon after. Guests made polite excuses. Hugs felt careful, like everyone was afraid of saying the wrong thing. When the last car pulled away, the lodge felt hollow, the string lights suddenly too bright. As I gathered my coat, Nora finally spoke. So what now? She asked, not meeting my eyes. I paused. Now? I said gently. Now nothing. This was always the truth. She laughed bitterly. You think you're better than me now? I turned to face her fully. No, I said. I think I finally stopped pretending I was less. She flinched. Marcus exhaled slowly, like someone realizing the ground beneath them had shifted. We need to talk, he said to her. Not angry, just firm. Nora nodded stiffly. I stepped outside into the cool night air, the lake reflecting the lights like scattered stars. My chest felt light. Not victorious. Not smug. Just free. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain who I was to anyone at all. The next morning, I woke up without the familiar knot in my stomach. No replaying conversations. No mental rewrites of what I should have said. Just sunlight slipping through the curtains and the distant sound of traffic beginning its day. The quiet felt earned. My phone, however, had other plans. 3 missed calls from my mother, 2 from my father, a long message from my aunt that started with "I hope you're not upset," and somehow managed to make everything about her confusion. I didn't open any of them. Not yet. I needed the calm to settle before I let other people's guilt knock it loose. Around noon, there was a knock at my door. Marcus stood in the hallway, looking like someone who hadn't slept. His jacket hung open, hair slightly unkempt, eyes rimmed with exhaustion and clarity. I hope this is okay, he said. I didn't know who else to talk to. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, coffee steaming between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he exhaled slowly. I keep thinking about how easily everyone accepted the version of you that fit their expectations, he said. Including me. I shrugged. You weren't the one who built it. No, he agreed. But I benefited from it. He told me about the conversation on the balcony. How Nora had insisted I tricked everyone. How she'd said success was supposed to be hers. That it felt like I'd stolen something invisible but essential from her. He didn't repeat her words with anger, just with disappointment. I don't know what this means for us, he admitted. But I know I can't ignore what I saw last night. I nodded. There was nothing to fix between us. He understood that. After he left, I finally listened to my parents' voicemails. My mother cried. My father apologized in a way that sounded like he was learning the language as he spoke it. Neither asked me to smooth things over. That was new. A few days later, Nora came by. No makeup, hair pulled back, the version of her that never appeared in public. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table, a careful distance between us. I was scared, she said finally, of being ordinary. of being second. I believed her. I never wanted to compete, I told her. I just wanted to exist without shrinking. She nodded slowly, eyes downcast. I don't know how to fix this. You don't have to fix it, I said. You just have to stop breaking it. She left not long after. No hugs. No dramatic reconciliation. Just a quiet understanding that things would be different, now whether she liked it or not. At the next family dinner, my parents asked questions and waited for the answers. My cousin Matteo raised a glass to me with a small smile. And no one summarized my life into something convenient. I used to think silence was kindness. I was wrong. Silence just teaches people how small they're allowed to make you. The weeks that followed felt unfamiliar, like walking through a house after someone rearranged all the furniture. Nothing was broken, but nothing sat where it used to either. At work, nothing changed. Courtrooms still echoed with arguments. Students still challenged my lectures. The weight of my decisions remained heavy and precise. But I had changed. I noticed it in small ways, the way I introduced myself without hesitation, the way I didn't soften my authority to make others comfortable. At home, though, the shift was impossible to ignore. Group chats that once skimmed past me now paused for my response. Relatives asked for my opinion on legal news, then actually listened. It was awkward sometimes, like everyone was learning new manners all at once. Nora stayed quiet. She didn't call. She didn't text. At first, I wondered if I should reach out, extend an olive branch the way I always had. The instinct was still there, to mend, to smooth, to absorb discomfort so others wouldn't have to. But I didn't. I let the space exist. One evening, my mother invited me over for dinner. Just the three of us. No extended family. No audience. She cooked too much food, fussed over the table, avoided my eyes until we sat down. Then she took a breath that shook slightly. I failed you, she said. The words landed harder than any accusation. I didn't mean to. She rushed on. I thought. You were fine. You never complained. I didn't feel safe complaining, I replied gently. My father nodded, eyes fixed on his plate. We thought attention was what Nora needed, he said. We didn't realize what it cost you. No excuses. No defensiveness. Just truth. I felt something loosen in my chest, not forgiveness exactly, but room for it. A few days later, Marcus called. He sounded steadier, determined. I postponed the wedding, he said. Not because of you, because of what your sister showed me. I closed my eyes briefly. Not in triumph. In understanding. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, he said. But ignoring it would have been worse. When we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and let it sink in. This wasn't revenge. No one had been destroyed. No empire had fallen. But the balance had shifted. Nora showed up again weeks later, standing in my doorway like she didn't know if she belonged there. I don't want to lose you, she said. I studied her for a long moment. Then don't ask me to be smaller. She nodded. Once, we weren't healed. We weren't close. But the rules had changed. And for the first time in my life, they weren't written at my expense. I slept that night without carrying anyone else's expectations into my dreams. The weeks that followed felt unfamiliar, like walking through a house after someone rearranged all the furniture. Nothing was broken, but nothing sat where it used to either. At work, nothing changed. Courtrooms still echoed with arguments. Students still challenged my lectures. The weight of my decisions remained heavy and precise. But I had changed. I noticed it in small ways, the way I introduced myself without hesitation, the way I didn't soften my authority to make others comfortable. At home, though, the shift was impossible to ignore. Group chats that once skimmed past me now paused for my response. Relatives asked for my opinion on legal news, then actually listened. It was awkward sometimes, like everyone was learning new manners all at once. Nora stayed quiet. She didn't call. She didn't text. At first, I wondered if I should reach out, extend an olive branch the way I always had. The instinct was still there. To mend, to smooth, to absorb discomfort so others wouldn't have to. But I didn't. I let the space exist. One evening, my mother invited me over for dinner. Just the three of us. No extended family. No audience. She cooked too much food, fussed over the table, avoided my eyes until we sat down. Then she took a breath that shook slightly. "I failed you," she said. The words landed harder than any accusation. "I didn't mean to," she rushed on. "I thought. You were fine. You never complained." "I didn't feel safe complaining," I replied gently. My father nodded, eyes fixed on his plate. "We thought attention was what Nora needed," he said. "We didn't realize what it cost you. No excuses. No defensiveness. Just truth." I felt something loosen in my chest, not forgiveness exactly, but room for it. A few days later, Marcus called. He sounded steadier, determined. "I postponed the wedding," he said. "Not because of you. Because of what your sister showed me." I closed my eyes briefly. Not in triumph. In understanding. "That couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," he said. "But ignoring it would have been worse." When we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and let it sink in. This wasn't revenge. No one had been destroyed. No empire had fallen. But the balance had shifted. Nora showed up again weeks later, standing in my doorway like she didn't know if she belonged there. "I don't want to lose you," she said. I studied her for a long moment. "Then don't ask me to be smaller." She nodded. "Once, we weren't healed. We weren't close. But the rules had changed. And for the first time in my life, they weren't written at my expense." I slept that night without carrying anyone else's expectations into my dreams. Life didn't transform overnight, but it did recalibrate. At the university, a new dean asked me to chair a committee, one that had real influence, real consequences. When I accepted, I didn't feel the old flicker of doubt, the impulse to downplay it when telling my family. I mentioned it plainly at dinner one night. No disclaimers. No jokes to soften the impact. My mother nodded slowly. "That sounds important," she said. And that was it. No awkwardness. No comparison. Just acknowledgement. Nora watched quietly. She was different now. Less polished in public, more guarded. At first, I mistook it for resentment, but I realized it was something else: uncertainty. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure how to take up space without stepping on someone else. One afternoon she called me. Not to argue. Not to accuse. Just to talk. "I'm thinking of switching jobs," she said. "Something smaller. Less performative." I leaned against my kitchen counter, surprised. "Do you want it?" I asked. "Or do you want people to admire it?" There was a long pause. "I don't know," she admitted. "That's okay," I said. And I meant it. Marcus never came back into our lives fully, but he sent one message months later. A simple thank you. For honesty. For perspective. For a truth he said he might have missed for years if I hadn't answered one question plainly. The strangest part was how light everything felt. I stopped rehearsing conversations in my head. Stopped anticipating dismissal before it happened. When people underestimated me now, it didn't sting the way it used to. I knew who I was. That knowledge was steady, immovable. At another family gathering, a distant relative asked, "So what do you do again?" I smiled. "I teach. I write. I decide." They blinked, unsure what to do with that. And I didn't help them. Later that night, Lily, who'd always squeezed my hand under the table when no one was watching, pulled me into a hug. "You look taller," she whispered. I laughed. I think I stopped bending. That was the real payoff. Not the stunned silence. Not the shifted loyalties. but the way my spine finally felt straight inside my own body. I'd spent years believing peace meant being agreeable. I was wrong. Peace came when I stopped negotiating my worth and let the truth speak for itself. The engagement party became a story my family told in fragments. Never the whole thing. Never in order. Just carefully edited versions that made it easier to digest. There was a misunderstanding. Feelings were high. Everyone learned something. The truth, I noticed, was still uncomfortable when spoken out loud. But it didn't need defending anymore. Months passed. Seasons changed. The lake by the lodge froze and thawed again, and with it, something else shifted permanently. My parents stopped introducing me with a job title at all. They said my name and let people ask their own questions. That small change meant more than any apology. Nora and I existed in a careful middle ground. We met for coffee occasionally. No performative closeness. No forced intimacy. Just two adults learning each other without the old script. Sometimes she slipped old habits resurfacing in the form of comparisons or half jokes, but she caught herself now. That mattered. One evening she surprised me. "I was jealous of you," she said quietly, staring into her cup. "Not your job. Your certainty. You never needed an audience." I considered that. "I needed safety," I said. Certainty came later. She nodded, absorbing it. At work, one of my students asked how I handled being underestimated in a field dominated by loud confidence. I told them the truth. "I let people be wrong," I said. "And I let my work correct them." That answer stayed with me. At another family dinner, my father raised a toast. Awkward. Unpolished, but sincere. "To Elena," he said, "for teaching us that quiet doesn't mean small." No one laughed. No one rushed past it. That night, as I drove home, I realized something important. Revenge had never been my intention, but justice had found its own way through honesty. No shouting. No spectacle. Just one answer, given at the right moment. I thought about how close I'd come to staying silent again. How easily I could have swallowed that question and let the lie live on. I didn't, and because of that, I no longer felt like I was waiting for my life to start. It already had. All it took was refusing to disappear when someone finally asked who I was. The last thing that changed was also the quietest. It happened months later on an ordinary afternoon, when nothing emotional or dramatic was supposed to happen at all. I was leaving the courthouse, files tucked under my arm, when my phone buzzed. A message from my mother. "We told Mrs. Klein about you today. She asked about our daughters. We told her you're a professor of criminal law. We didn't rush it. We didn't compare. We just said it." I stood there on the steps longer than I meant to, reading it twice. Not because it was perfect, but because it was different. That night, I sat alone on my balcony, city lights blinking on one by one, and thought about how close I'd come to living an entire life unseen. Not unloved, just unrecognized. There's a difference, and it's a painful one. Nora and I still weren't best friends. We might never be. But we spoke honestly now. When she got a new job, one she chose because it felt right. Not impressive, she told me first. No competition. No performance. "I think I'm happier," she said. "I'm glad," I replied. And I meant it without resentment. Marcus sent one final message before disappearing from our orbit completely. "I learned something from you that night. Thank you for standing still and letting the truth do the work." He was right about that. I didn't fight. I didn't expose anyone. I didn't raise my voice or deliver a speech. I answered one question honestly, and the world rearranged itself around that answer. That's the part people misunderstand about power. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just refuses to lie anymore. I used to think being kind meant making myself smaller so others could feel tall. I was wrong. Real kindness to yourself and to others means showing up as you are and letting the truth land where it may. If you've ever been underestimated, mislabeled, or quietly diminished to keep the peace, know this: you don't owe anyone a smaller version of yourself. One honest moment can change how an entire room remembers you. And once that happens, you never have to disappear again.